In this 25th episode of the Misaal podcast, I talked to Mutaher Khan. He covers startups for Dawn and publishes insights and trends on Data Darbar. His knowledge of the startup ecosystem makes him a great resource for understanding the realities on the ground. Our discussion covers startup funding in the wake of Airlift's shutdown, ongoing layoffs in both tech companies and startups, and Tag's alleged fraud. He also discusses how his reporting unearthed the unethical and misleading behavior of instant loan apps. Let's listen in. Welcome to the Misaal podcast again, Mutaher. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me again.
So the first time you came in December, it was like a second or third episode. So it was lovely hearing your insights about the ecosystem. But since we last spoke, a lot of things have changed. And, सितारों से आगे जहाँ और भी हैं, we went from that to basically हज़ारों ख्वाहिशें ऐसी कि हर ख्वाहिश पे दम निकले. So what has happened in the ecosystem in the past 6 months? Like just give us 6 to 8 months, basically. Just give us a rundown or how things are going.
I mean, a lot has happened. I think in December we had already touched the highest fundraising, and we sort of went on that trajectory for another quarter. Even though globally fundraising पे impact आना शुरू हो गया था, but पाकिस्तान के अंदर obviously lag के साथ जो announcements हो रही थी, it still kept showing के. And we even touched the best quarter, right? As we discussed yesterday,
Yes.
we included that deal.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're looking at the best quarter, but obviously you can't beat the cycle, and especially if most of the capital is coming from abroad. So it was always going to come bite us, and even from December there was the issue of growth capital, right? If you were so between that, the biggest story was it has obviously been Airlift shutting down, but that concern, and this is not the benefit of hindsight play as many suggest. There were concerns around that big around for any startup, right? Even at that point, I think in December I discussed with a few people that $300 million is going to be tricky for Pakistan in any cycle. So then obviously the cycle changed. So वो तो खैर पूरी कहानी it was a different matter altogether. Then the tag fiasco happened. So abhi recently State Bank took an action, which so there were two big downers happening to the ecosystem, because I think उस वक्त तक Tag, before D-Bank, Tag was the most funded startup as well in fintech. And I mean, अभी को हटा अभी था actually, बाद में अभी आ गया था, अभी raised bridge or go, but after that, in the wallet space, you could say. So it was a big blow because a lot of people were hoping, especially from Airlift, बहुत सारी चीजें उम्मीद बांध के रखी हुई थी, but खैर वो हुआ नहीं हुआ. That's another debate, but that just shows you the kind of impact this global fundraising cycle will have, right? And a lot of things that investors were letting go of in 2021 are not in this cycle, and that is obviously a bigger concern for Pakistan than anyone. I mean, then maybe US-based startups, or the best tricky ho jayega. And I think abhi recently I've been seeing tweets how great in-person meetings are and all of that. तो उसके बाद क्या होगा फंड रेजिंग में. I mean, it wouldn't be a big thing, but just how the perceptions are changing all of a sudden, right? It's a major concern. तो अभी तक फंड रेजिंग वापस पिछले 10 दिन के अंदर तो वापस फंड रेजिंग का मोमेंटम लग रहा है कि बनाए, but obviously one of those deals was announced much earlier. I think Tanya shared the D-Bank thing long time back.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
In March, yeah.
Even the Sequoia news was it was being discussed time and again. I even mentioned in a story, I think in May. I didn't name D-Bank, but that news has been around for some time as well. Like I think I first heard like 3 months ago or something. So they had Sequoia on board already. One load, I'm sure it was done some time back as well. But again, deals are still happening. Luckily for us, बहुत सारी डील्स सीड और प्री सीड पे थी, which are showing impact of the fundraising slowdown, but are relatively doing with lag. तो लैग आते आते थोड़ा इम्पैक्ट को भी टाइम लगेगा, एंड वी शुड क्रॉस द 360 365 और वट एवर मिलियन बाय, आई थिंक वी शुड कंफर्टेबली डू दैट. हाँ, आई मीन बिफोर एंड ऑफ द ईयर आई वुड इवन से, मतलब आई थिंक अक्टूबर एंड तक तो होपफुली हो जाना चाहिए इतना.
Let's unpack like what happened with Airlift. पहले तो उन्होंने announce किया था कि layoffs, right? So they said if we have layoffs, we can extend the runway and all that stuff. And then suddenly it shut down. So when you raise $85 million that they raised last year, especially with the way things are in Pakistan, तो मुझे तो एक चीज़ अभी तक ये समझ में नहीं आई कि knowing the fact that Pakistani rupee is always depreciating, these startups are raising money in US dollars and then have to go to Pakistani customers and earn money in rupees. राइट, सो वो कन्वर्जन जो है ना, ये तो पाकिस्तान का वैसा ही हाल जो है इसी तरह से ख़राब हुआ हुआ है, राइट, कि पैसे जो हमने लिए हुए हैं गवर्नमेंट एंड ऑल दैट स्टफ, it's always in US dollars, but we have to pay back somehow converting from rupees, and rupee is always depreciating. So that was like troublesome to begin with. I mean, that's the case with almost all startups all over the world. They raise in US dollars because they have US or foreign VCs, and US dollar happens to be the dominant currency. But then again, shutdown, I don't think I saw it coming, or other people I don't think saw it coming. Few maybe might have seen it coming, but my last insight into Airlift was like that interview that Ahmed had with Umair Abedin from NIC. That was like a month before the shutdown news, right? So, and he sounded very optimistic that we have it under control. But things, of course, changed right away. And startups are messy, so these things are bound to happen. From that, I mean, I'm not going to talk about. I don't want to talk about actually why Airlift failed, because startups fail all the time. What I want to talk about is how will that affect the ecosystem at large in terms of making it easy for other startups to raise money.
I think there are two aspects to it, right? If we look at Airlift in isolation, investors are well aware of how Q-commerce startups are doing around the world, right? So it shouldn't, in that sense, it shouldn't really have a broader impact, more than like the overall market cycle, at least. I mean, there will be one impact of the market cycle that is completely understandable, and that's already showing signs, right? But beyond that, if we try to measure the impact of Airlift, I think investors will see it in the light of Q-commerce, how it's doing everywhere else. But there's that condition that which could be a cause of concern, was the Deal Street story from Ariba about the forensic audit. And if that is whenever that audit happens, if it happens, if that leads to some revelations, then it could be a problem, because it reflects on the ecosystem, and that is the concern. I don't think Airlift failing in itself is a problem, and especially that becomes a bigger risk in the light of Tag, right? Because Tag has done it,
Correct. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's been proved. So
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I was going to say that Tag is actually, done something that at least the reports say that Tag has done something wrong and SCCP has taken some action. So there's something going on there. But with Airlift, it's right now it's just speculation. I still am trying to figure out what happened with Tag, but it seems like they were accepted to Y Combinator. They went out and like raised money from who's who of the investors, right? And for some reason, I don't know how this might have been like not an issue for them during this entire time. Where how could they not figure out someone is clearly doing things that are not ethical? So if that's happening,
I mean, that beats me. I don't know if you recall, I wrote a piece, I think in September 2021, and I didn't name the startups, but now I can. Uh, I talked about one EMI lying on its deck, and it was tagged. And the lie was basically that the EMI in question had misrepresented facts on its deck, which based one being that it's fully licensed, which it wasn't, and the other two, and the other was the timeline of its licensing approvals. It was as per the deck, Tag should have the commercial should have had the commercial launch license in Q2, and we are already in Q3, and it's a whole different story, right? Tag was still generally it takes around 20 months more or less to get the entire to go through the entire licensing procedure. I mean, there was some signs again. But that investors were, I think, willing to look past. It's not like investors weren't aware of it. I mean, there are two things. I think either you were stupid or you were incompetent. I mean, if you can't see through that, and this applies to not tag or anything. Like a lot of companies, right? There are some clear facts in your face that you can't just ignore. There are two Google searches away, and if you're not willing to go and I don't know do two searches even, then I don't know who else is responsible. So I think AIF was extravagant and tag was fraudulent. I think they're so I think tag का यही मसला है, right? And this is a bigger risk in especially in fintech when it's regulated. You have to be extra cautious. You can't do things the same way. And even though I think State Bank did try its best to protect tag for quite some time because the thing became not public knowledge, but like in financial circles, it was known at least 3 months back. So I'm sure the regulator knew it. I mean, again, if they're not listening to the market, then there's a problem. So State Bank knew it. Tag wali cheese will be a big dampener, and it will reflect very poorly on the VCs, the local VCs as well, right? Because they are supposed to take the lead in due diligence. I mean, do they have a bigger responsibility to do that or not? कोई अलग बहस है, but they naturally have a better understanding of the market. So then it also raises the question that on investors generally कि जब ये चीजें आ रही थी, did investors, I don't know, maybe they did, but did investors actually get an audit done? And that applies for Airlift as well, right? कि अगर अगर कोई controversy आती है, and uh, do they take notice of that, or they handle it internally? I mean, do they handle it internally even? मतलब public आप ठीक है, आप you don't need to take it to the press. There is no need. But internally किया था. That is my question. कि बाद में चीजें हो जाने के बाद sort of crying victim कि हमें तो पता नहीं था, then I mean you're probably not doing a very good job at keeping those checks and balances, because as an investor it's sort of your job. I mean, I'm sure you get an investor update, a monthly investor update. I'm sure you have access to the data room. So I mean, it's not that difficult to find uh, cracks in those from that data, right? And I'm sure they are capable people. They even have analysts whose entire job is that. So I'm sure they can do that. So maybe it was a matter of willingness, because 2021 की cycle के अंदर people were willing to let go of a lot of things that they wouldn't usually. और अब एकदम से वो realization पे आ रहे हैं, and this is unfortunately a lot of that has to be वो एंड में founders के board बनेंगे. But then again, founders need to be aware of that fact as well. And I mean, मैं as an outsider ही कह सकता हूँ, but again, it wasn't me who raised that money, right? So I don't need to be responsible for that. I don't have that responsibility. They do.
No, so that's all valid points. So the one thing that I noticed, I'm not 100% sure about tag, but Airlift, जब पहली बार ये जब मैंने सुना कि there might be some accounting irregularities, and so I was like, okay, let's look up who's link. I went to LinkedIn. I basically searched for CFO Airlift, right? Nothing showed up. So apparently Airlift never had a CFO. When a startup is a series, I would say by series A, or series B definitely, but series A, like you need to have a CFO. You need to have this one guy who says no to everything. CFO's job at a startup is to say no to everything. They will say yes to very few things, but that's the reason you need them, because a founder, the CTO, the co-founders, the management team, they will be like, ye bhi kar lete hain, wo bhi kar lete hain, aise grow karte hain, waise grow karte hain. The CFO is like, you know what? No, you can't do this, because if you do this, you will run out of money in like 6 months. Fintech is a completely different beast, right? Tag jo hai, it's like, it has to seek approvals and all that. So VC due diligence there should have been even more severe, right? Like they should have done a lot more due diligence. But then again, it did not happen. Let's move on to layoffs now. So have the layoffs stopped, or do you think they will stop soon, or what's going on there?
No, I doubt it. I highly doubted the layoff, and there's no sign of layoff stopping. But balki there has been news of tracks as well, just which actually was doing a lot of hiring based on growth, right? Not in the sense of subsidized growth, but actual much more fundamental growth. But the problem was that its clients were still subsidizing their growth. So when they sort of stopped, then it had an impact on tracks as well. And tracks laid off, I think, what they didn't lay off too many people. That I think I was confused. I read the story and I somewhere I saw like 50 people and then 20%. So I'm not sure if tracks had just 250 people, because tracks, I've been to their offices a couple of times. If we include the fleet, tracks last year around this time had like 1400, 1500 employees. And obviously for a courier company, employees should fleet should be fleet members should be counted as employees. And since they were on payroll, so I would be even more willing to include them. So I don't know, but again, the problem is that e-commerce is slowing down. SBP's data from January to March already shows a decline of 4 million transactions. That doesn't include the cash-based transactions, so we don't know how that is happening. हमें नहीं पता. Then there's been some rumors in the trucking industry, not good ones, right? तो वो अब क्या होता है? Maybe there would be a few more announcements in the next few weeks.
What I have not seen so far is the B2B startups laying off people. So are they doing something, or
They
are
are
they just
actually
because B2B is
I
a
mean,
lot stronger?
I do think it's more stronger, or at least it's more. And this was my key concern. And again, not hindsight 2020, because I pointed out again and again that anyone doing the consumer space is doomed generally. And that is nothing against the startup, but my problem with Pakistan's economy, because you can't really have faith in this economy, honestly. There's You are an idiot if you do. The structural problems are not going to be addressed, and a VC funded startup with even $500 million cannot do that. It's just not possible. You can't fix that. And you can't fix that by subsidizing consumption. That is for sure. You can maybe make an exit if the timing is right, sure. But you can't fix that problem. That's what I'm saying here. So B2B obviously in that sense was targeting a much real problem. Let's put it this way. So
It's
it
a
would be
digitization
relative.
play, right? It's a
Yeah,
digitization play.
yeah,
It's like
yeah,
basically converting traditional businesses to digital, right? So that's like a natural evolution with technology, right? Like
exactly,
that's what they're doing. So it's like the market is already there.
exactly. I think they have been relatively more immune, but I wouldn't say entirely. I mean, Tracks is B2B, right? Retailer laid off some people. Retailer was B2B. Then you have Truckerton was again B2B. So I wouldn't say that they have been immune, because for example, anyone operating in the logistics space, so overall consumer demand is going down, then obviously business demand is going to be impacted as well. Uh, it's That's not changing. So, if, for example, if you are catering to I don't know, cement manufacturers to move their cargo, and cement numbers are down, then your numbers are going to be impacted, right? And if you are catering to cement manufacturers to help with their warehousing, for example, and if their numbers are down, then your numbers are going to be down. And it goes basically, you can't really escape it. B2B के अंदर FMCG की सेल्स में अभी रिजल्ट्स आना शुरू हो गए हैं. I'll check in the next few days. We'll get a good idea कि FMCG के नंबर से क्या हुआ. Obviously वो इतना रिफ्लेक्ट नहीं हो पाएगा, क्योंकि FMCG की वॉल्यूम्स में आएगा, बट वैल्यू के अंदर शायद इतना ना आए बिकॉज दे पास ऑन द प्राइसिंग. बट यू विल सी के किरियाना स्टोर्स को जो केटर कर रहे हैं उनके ऊपर क्या इम्पैक्ट आया, एटलीस्ट एज अ ट्रू प्रॉक्सी. एसबीपी रिलीजेस albeit with a big lag, some data on FMCG as well that can be helpful to gauge where the market is going. And this और B2B के अंदर आई थिंक जो इम्पैक्ट आएगा और किसी हद तक आना शुरू हो गया होगा, आई एम श्योर, is in the credit space because everyone moved in the credit space, and that was always going to be a very risky bet. And as someone said to me that, and it applies to tag and it applies to a lot of others as well, that a lot of people in fintech actually have no idea of the fin side of it. So it's just tech. uh, so,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah,
it's
that makes sense. Yeah, when I personally, this is just completely irrelevant, but I'll say it. So when I look at B2B, I see, like, of course, the way they will end up making money is through financing, right? Connecting people. It's a very low margin business. Financing, on the other hand, is like high volume, and even if the transaction fee or even if the percentage of interest is very low, over time, like, you make a lot of money. So I think that's the main play with mostly B2B. And as far as B2B goes, I think Bazaar is extremely well insulated. I think founders have an idea what they're doing. I don't know them, but I think they have an idea. They have, like, maintain a very low profile. So one way I gauge a startup, it's not very scientific, but how much noise they're making, right? What is a startup doing compared to how much noise they're making? And in that regard, I feel like in this category, Bazaar, Retailo, Dastagir, out of all these three, I think Dastagir makes a lot of noise. So I wonder what their situation is like.
I think the reason that Dastagir makes more noise is, I think in a sense, is a good thing as well because they actually have a professional leading their comms, right? So it sort of
So
reflects. The founders are not making the noise. It's the comms head that making noise, and he's doing a
but
very good job at that, right?
But if you, Dastagir, the thing about making noise is when you make a lot of noise. So let's just say that the Dastagir makes a lot of noise. It makes a lot of noise on LinkedIn, social media, etc., etc. But that's not where their customers are, right? Their customers are Kiryana stores. So making that noise, of course, there's a professional leading their PR and comms, and I've seen him on the podcasts and all those things, doing all those things. Lekin I've also seen their pitch deck, which was like 6-8 months ago. And I just didn't think the numbers there had any substance, literally made up numbers. I think that will eventually bite them. And I don't know when that will happen, but eventually I feel like they'll have to either cut down on, like, the employees or figure out a different way to, increase their market share because they have competition from, like, both sides.
My way of gauging anyone in the anyone in this space, or like, I try to just go out and see exactly. For example, अगर airlift का होगा तो I'll I'll used to literally count the number of bikes I'd seen, right? मैं हर दफा बाइक क्रॉस करने के बाद गिनता था कि ठीक है अब 10 बाइक्स देख ली मैंने एयरलिफ्ट की इतने दिन, जो इतनी सारी नहीं थी ऑनेस्टली बाइक्स. तो दैट वाज ऑलवेज माय question, okay, why don't I see the bikes? That has always been my question regarding airlift. And similarly, अगर किराना स्टोर्स की बात करें, I just go out and see. I talk to the guy I get chips from. मैं उससे पूछता हूँ कि जैसे बीच में वेवी बहुत शॉर्ट हुए थे कराची के अंदर, ये वेवी और लेस मिल ही नहीं रहे
अच्छा,
होते
मुझे स्लिम्स नहीं
थे.
मिले कहीं पे. स्लिम्स नहीं मिल रहे थे मुझे. मैं जब आया था मार्च में, आई कुड नॉट फाइंड स्लिम्स. और स्लिम्स के अलावा, आई मीन, आई डोंट ईट एनीथिंग एल्स, बट आई कुडंट फाइंड स्लिम्स.
शॉर्टेज जनरली मार्च में हुई थी, आई थिंक, इफ आई एम नॉट रॉन्ग. हाँ, तो मे बी वो ब्रॉडर कंपनी की शॉर्टेज, 2-3 ब्रांड्स की शॉर्टेज का मसला हो सकता है. तो बट मेरा वो था कि जो चीज रेगुलरली मार्केट में नहीं मिल रही, यहाँ पे भी नहीं मिल रही थी, एंड आई स्टार्टेड टॉकिंग टू द स्टोर गाय who generally has a very good turnover, कि मतलब अगर आज स्टॉक होंगे, एंड आई बेस इट इंटायरली ऑन वीवी. मैं आई एम नॉट सेइंग कि ये पूरा रिप्रेजेंटेटिव हुआ, आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट वन स्टोर और उसमें भी सिर्फ वेवी. एंड आई थिंक दैट हैज बीन ट्विटर के ऊपर भी देयर हैज बीन के क्रेव मार्ट के ऊपर या एयरलिफ्ट के ऊपर लेज नहीं मिल रहे, राइट? तो अगर सबसे मशहूर चिप्स नहीं मिल रहे हैं, ऑब्वियसली वेवी इज वन ब्रांड ऑफ इट. वेवी इज नॉट द entirety, but it just gives you an idea कि अगर इम्तियाज पे नहीं मिल रहे, किसी को नहीं मिल रहे, and the store is not getting through any app, and that was the sentiment shared. And then I asked, I occasionally asked, तू बहुत ज़्यादा रेगुलरली नहीं करता, बट जब भी मेरी चीज़ नहीं मिल रही थी तो मैं पूछ लेता हूँ कि क्या होगा, फिर मैं सवाल पूछना शुरू कर देता हूँ ऐप्स के बारे में. एंड इट्स बीन के यार रेगुलरली एज सच नहीं मंगवा रहा होता, एटलीस्ट मेरे मोहल्ले के अंदर अभी भी किरियाना ऐप से. हो सकता है यहाँ पे क्रेडिट टर्म्स नहीं दे रहे हो, मे बी दैट कुड बी वन फैक्टर, आई एम नॉट श्योर. अभी लास्ट, क्योंकि जब उस वक्त तक क्रेडिट पे बहुत ज़्यादा अग्रेसिवली लॉन्च नहीं किया था इन्होंने, नया नया नई ऑफरिंग थी क्रेडिट की. मगर यही है कि अभी भी आई थिंक परसों भी जब मैं गया हुआ था तो आई सॉ कंपनी का बंदा खुद आया हुआ था, एज कोई ऑनलाइन बुकिंग नहीं चल रही थी. So that I think is the best indicator, and because I think these are the areas. If you're looking at Peaches, Gulshan, Nasamabad, I think these will be the first areas where any of these companies will actually target, which they'll target, right? But I haven't really seen. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they are starting with Korangi. Maybe they are starting with Malir, or I don't know. I'm pretty sure they're not starting from Lines area or Liari. That I'm sure about. क्योंकि I haven't seen, मेरा लाइन्स एरिया सब भी गुजर हुआ है, मैंने कभी इनकी एस सच गाड़ी नहीं देखी. बिकॉज अगेन I need to see those vehicles to believe that, and that in the end is my like litmus test. If you look at the numbers available on the internet and whatever you can gauge from the internet, I think Bazaar is doing the best. This is my general sentiment as well. I agree. If you look at their, I mean, the way they are. I mean, I haven't even seen Dastagi's ads or retailers ads, honestly. Bazaar के मैंने ads बाजार के तो नहीं देखे थे, easy खाता के देखे. I mean, not doing their targeting very well, but still, at least you can see that money is being spent somewhere. Uh, uh, एक तो ये चीज है. Then obviously, again, it's people in the startup ecosystem talk as well, and again, Bazaar always sort of comes out on the top.
Yeah, I mean, my bet has always been on like, Bazaar ho gaya, Baikia ho gaya. Like they are, I think, doing a good job. I mean, Baikia, of course, was not able to raise funding as much as they wanted to, and there were some delays with funding too. Like still, like like when I was in Karachi, I used Baikia. I saw Baikia cars, bikes on the road. So you could see that these startups or these companies are out there in public limelight, and that's how it should be. Like you should be able to tell if someone is using the money that they have raised or they are like non-existent. So let's move on to a different topic. Very recently you basically posted about how loan apps on Google Play Store using people's ignorance to basically sell them something that they don't need, first of all. Second, fine print is not clear and they're charging crazy amount of interest to people who take out those loans. So give me a background on like what happened, and what was the end result of like you talking about it. And even Atif, I think, did a Twitter thread on it. So what happened? Like, how did it start and how did it end?
It actually started much earlier. I had been delaying this for so long. Actually, I just quickly alluded to this in August in an article about lending ecosystem, and I mentioned that there are a couple of players operating which have scaled fast in terms of downloads. Again, that was my metric at the point. अभी भी बल्कि because that is the data that I had access to, तो मैं उसके ऊपर बात करूंगा. अब तो खैर obviously lending के अंदर there has been a lot more data that's come to light. State SECP ने number of borrowers, number of loans का खुद data release किया है, and it's the, I mean, if you look at the scale, it's phenomenal, honestly. Uh, and just in terms of magnitude, not in terms of its desirability, obviously. तो ये जून के अंदर बर वक्त, आई रिमेम्बर वेरी, आई थिंक जून 9 2021 में बर वक्त लॉन्च हुई थी, एंड आई डिड द पीस आई थिंक 18 अगस्त और समथिंग, एंड इट हैड क्रॉस्ड 100 के उस वक्त तक. आई वाजंट यूज्ड टू सच ट्रैजेक्टरीज इन पाकिस्तानी प्ले स्टोर. बहुत ही कम दिखता है कि आप 2 महीने के अंदर लाख क्रॉस करें. इट्स वेरी रेयर. देन देयर वाज आई थिंक अब नहीं है वो। डक लोन एक होती थी, डक लोन ऐप स्टोर प्ले स्टोर से रिमूव हो गई है। AI कैश उस वक्त भी थी। तो देवर फोर, एंड फ्रॉम व्हाट आई कुड सी, सीड ट्रेड के पीछे देयर वाज समवन फ्रॉम द फाइनेंशियल सर्विसेज इंडस्ट्री, बट बाकियों के पीछे आई कुडंट रियली फाइंड एनीवन। उस वक्त भी आई थिंक सीड ट्रेड का भी उस वक्त तक लाइसेंस, इफ आई डोंट रिमेम्बर उनकी लाइसेंसिंग का स्टेटस, हो सकता है अप्लाई कर दिया और था नहीं, आई डोंट रियली रिमेम्बर। तो ये उस वक्त स्टेटस था। एंड देन आई केप्ट इग्नोरिंग इट, चीज़ें पाइल ऑन होती गई। मैं इनकी ग्रोथ देखे जा रहा था। आई थिंक मार्च अप्रैल के अंदर, when I was end March, I was working on the roundup. I was sitting in the office, and the office boy came and asked me, "यार कि बर वक्त कि ना कर्ज अदा कर दो।" तो उस वक्त फिर मैं वापस उस वक्त देखा था कि उस वक्त 7 मिलियन क्रॉस कर लिए थे, अगर मुझे सही याद पड़ रहा है। विच इज अगेन, जिस पॉइंट पे भी बर वक्त की जिस पॉइंट पे भी देखता था, इट वॉज ऑलवेज ह्यूज। आई हैड नेवर एक्सपेक्टेड पाकिस्तानी ऐप टू डू सो वेल इन टर्म्स ऑफ अगेन डाउनलोड्स, बट दे डिड। उन्होंने डाउनलोड्स के अलावा भी, दे एक्चुअली सिर्फ डाउनलोड्स नहीं थे, बिकॉज दे हैड अ लॉट ऑफ borrowers, they disbursed, I don't know, maybe 7 billion rupees, if I'm not somewhere around, अगर 10 billion किए थे, and they were the only major ones doing in 2021। और पूरा साल इफ आई एम नॉट रॉन्ग उन्होंने ऑपरेट भी नहीं किया था। uh, हाँ, जून 9 पे तो हुई थी बेसिकली। तकरीबन 7 महीने के अंदर पूरी इंडस्ट्री ने 10 बिलियन की, और बर वक्त वॉज लाइक बाय फार लीडिंग दैट। सो दे में आई मीन एस्टिमेटेडली 7 बिलियन तो कर ही लेंगे उन्होंने लेंडिंग के, विच इज अ ह्यूज नंबर, राइट। उस वक्त चेंज के हिसाब से इट्स इवन बिगर, आज तो फिर भी कम लगे। तो देन ट्विटर के ऊपर आई स्टार्ट सीइंग, तो फिर मैं वापस बैठा, एंड देन द नंबर्स वर, आई जस्ट, बर वक्त का मुझे पता था, सरमाया इजी लोन का मुझे किसी हद तक पता था, बट AI कैश का पता था, बट आई डिडंट नो द एक्सटेंट ऑफ प्लेयर्स। आई डिडंट नो कि उस वक्त, आई थिंक जब मैंने किया था जून 28 पे, जून 28 वाले दिन 27 थी जो कि टॉप 100 में थी फाइनेंस कैटेगरी के अंदर। आई थिंक 2-3 जो थी उसमें भी थी, ओवरऑल के अंदर भी आ रही थी। बर वक्त तो आती है वैसे। देन ऑब्वियसली modus operandi was very clear. It was going to be a loan shark. Like there was never any going to be any doubt about it. Uh, Atif actually picked it up, which had a huge impact, honestly, uh, because uh, he had a lot of reach. He had uh, a lot of credibility in that sense. बहुत सारे लोग में awareness में बहुत काम आया। That helped. उसके बाद हुआ ये कि because there were some numbers available from SECP, from app estimates, it kind of it gave a magnitude of their scale, which helped drive the case. SECP भी थोड़ा सा संजीदा हुआ। I mean, I wouldn't even say संजीदा, but at least उन्होंने तकल्लुफन बुलाया तो उन्हें सही। उससे पहले तो they were just उन्हें पता था। I mean, you can't ignore that, because again, if I picked it up in August, then I mean, I hope they had picked it up earlier, or at least 2-3 महीने बाद पकड़ लेना चाहिए था, क्योंकि दिसंबर के अंदर, इफ आई एम नॉट रॉन्ग, दे हैड क्रॉस्ड लाइक मिलियन प्लस बर वक्त। तो they were adding like 400 to 500K more or less हर महीने।
So right now, are they those apps still in the app store, just living loans or giving out loans, or
यार
it
मैंने
stopped?
कुछ दिन से देखी नहीं थी, बट जैसे बर वक्त को हटा दिया था, इजी लोन को हटा दिया था, बट इजी लोन की जो पेरेंट कंपनी है सरमाया, उसकी 2 एप्स थी। पीके लोन क्योंकि मिस आती थी, उनकी रिलेटिवली नई ऐप थी, तो ज्यादातर फोकस जो है, एनालिसिस जो है इजी लोन और बर वक्त पे चल रहा था, तो उनको तो हटा दिया गूगल प्ले ने। गूगल ने भी बेसिकली डंडी मारी। व्हाट सरमाया हैड डन वाज के पब्लिशर्स अलग अलग थे। एक में सरमाया माइक्रो फाइनेंस प्राइवेट लिमिटेड था, एक में शायद सरमाया, कोई बहुत ही माइनर सी वेरिएशन थी, आई डोंट इवन रिमेम्बर। या तो किसी में डबल ए था, किसी में सिंगल ए था सरमाया में। तो गूगल ने जो ज्यादा जिसके ऊपर वावेला मच रहा था, गूगल ने वो रिमूव कर दी। और दूसरी वाली उसी पब्लिशर की, इट कुडंट इवन सी के यार उन्होंने वो नहीं हटाई नहीं. एंड गूगल few days earlier had written that they were compliant with Google's developers policies and whatnot. So I asked them then what exactly changed between 1 week, क्योंकि आप तो वही है. तो अब कैसे, obviously it's Google, so they never really get back. I mean they're they think that their PR campaign is not replying. PR strategy is not replying at all. So it never really got a response. Interestingly, uh, the CEOs were claiming कि SCCP की compliances meet करने के लिए हम लोगों ने ऐप हटाई है. तो अगेन आई एम नॉट श्योर, मैंने क्वेश्चन से देखी नहीं थी. लेट मी एक्चुअली चेक अभी. नहीं, तो बर वक्त इज नॉट देयर. AI Cash is there, Easy Loan is there, sorry, PK Loan is there, which is the second app from Sarmaya. तो एज सच कोई क्रैकडाउन नहीं हुआ. ये तकल्लुफन आई थिंक दिल के बहलाने को उन्होंने जो दो बड़े बड़े नाम थे उनको हटा दिया. AI Cash has been an unregulated player since probably the earliest player. I think May के अंदर आया था AI Cash before बरवा. वो अभी भी आज भी ऑपरेट कर रहे हैं. They don't have a license. Then you have कुछ तो सिंगल ऑपरेटर्स ऑपरेट कर रहे हैं. मतलब लिटरली एक बंदे के नाम से, आई थिंक वियतनामीज इंसान के नाम से आप रजिस्टर्ड थी. उसकी पब्लिक उसने एटलीस्ट लॉन्च की हुई थी, तो वो चला रहा है. देन इंटरेस्टिंगली there is, I think, a lot of platforms. I haven't been able to confirm this, but if I'm not wrong, a lot of these platforms are the same platforms. I think Zaki Khalid on Twitter did a thread that the skeleton was the same, and I'll tweet it. आज मेरे पास रखी हुई वीडियो. मेरे पास रैपिड क्रेडिट का एक ऐड आ रहा था, एंड आई वॉच द ऐड, और वो उसके अंदर कह रहा था बर वक्त डाउनलोड करो. तो आई थिंक इसके अंदर पीछे से फ्रंट नाम बदल देते हैं, एंड इट लीड्स टू सेम सिस्टम, सेम ऐप, व्हिच इज अगेन वेरी शेडी. इट्स टेक्स्ट
या
बुक
नहीं,
शेडी,
तो
राइट?
मैं वही सोच रहा था कि लाइक जिसने भी ऐप जो है पब्लिश की है ऐप स्टोर पे, लाइक उस बंदे में कितना कॉन्फिडेंस होगा, क्योंकि 5-6 साल पहले ना मुझे 2-3 आइडियाज़ आए थे ऐप के ना. तो मैं जब देख रहा था ऐप्स, उसी उसी कैटेगरी में ऐप्स देख रहा था, तो मैं देखा कि इस पब्लिशर का नाम जो है ना वो लिखा हुआ था ऐप के ऊपर ना, पब्लिशर्स एड्रेस, एवरीथिंग इज देयर, राइट. तो मुझे था कि यार मैं अपना नाम नहीं चाहता हूँ उस पर आए, राइट. तो मैंने कभी वो ऐप बनाई नहीं, पब्लिश की नहीं, क्योंकि मुझे था कि वो मेरा नाम पूछेंगे ऐप स्टोर पे, गूगल प्ले स्टोर पे, तो मुझे नाम देना पड़ेगा. तो मैंने कभी ऐप बनाई. लेकिन इनका क्या है कि इन्होंने ऐप भी बनाई, लोगों को पैसे भी दिए, और सब कुछ खुल्लम खुल्ला हो रहा है. यानी कि कोई कोई है ही नहीं कि भाई कुछ होगा कि नहीं होगा. अपने नाम से चल रहा है सब
अरे
कुछ.
खुल्लम खुला, इसमें दो एस्पेक्ट्स है, राइट? कि एक जो रेगुलेटेड है वो तो खुल्लम खुल्ला कर ही रहा है, राइट? उनके पास तो एसएससीपी का सपोर्ट है. इनफैक्ट जो एसएससीपी ने बुलाया था, वो कहा क्या था, एसएससीपी ने प्रेस रिलीज इशू की कि unregulated players are bringing a bad name, even though it's the regulated players who are charging 1000% plus
तो
APR, but somehow it's
राइट, तो मुझे वो पूछना था कि इज देयर अ लॉ इन पाकिस्तान फाइनेंशियल सर्विसेज में कि a bank or a financial institution cannot, there's a cap for interest rate, that you cannot charge more than that.
no, there is no cap as such, but you can't lend unless you're regulated, right? कि वो लॉ तो है. आई थिंक किसी हद तक चलो आई कैन इवन सी के यार ठीक है, इंटरेस्ट रेट्स will be higher, sure. It's a high credit risk, but again, then there's the question कि इस चीज़ की ज़रूरत ही नहीं है सच. ये एक ज़बरदस्ती का शोशा छोड़ देते हैं जस्ट हर कुछ अर्से बाद. And I think Temu did a very good piece on it some time back. Financial inclusion is overrated. Uh, I mean, and the point just वो आइडिया उसकी फाइनेंशियल इंक्लूजन का जो चूरन बेचा जाता है, दैट इज ऑफन मीनिंगलेस. लेंडिंग, अगर आप 10,000 का किसी को कर्ज दे रहे हैं और उसमें से उसको एंड में वो बेचारा जिंदगी भर का गुलाम बन के रह जाएगा उस कर्ज का, तो आई थिंक दैट इज नॉट इंक्लूजन. दैट इज नॉट फाइनेंशियल इंक्लूजन बाय एनी डेफिनेशन. तो खैर एससीसीपी ने इसको कहने को कुछ किया नहीं. दूसरे वाले तो जो है बहुत सारे चाइनीज प्लेयर्स हैं. So they are operating with complete like इम्यूनिटी. उन्हें कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ रहा. वो आज हटेंगे. गूगल भी हटा नहीं रहा है सच तो ना. गूगल हटा रहा होता तो वो नए, जैसे हमारे पाकिस्तान के अंदर बैंड आउटफिट्स नाम बदल के आ जाते हैं, वो भी आ जाते. तो वो वही वाली चीज होती. बट अभी तक तकल्लुफ ये भी नहीं हुआ कि उन्हें बैन करने का तकल्लुफ कर देते. व्हाट्स वेरी स्ट्रेंज टू मी, आई मीन नॉट दैट स्ट्रेंज, बट लाइक व्हाट्स द कॉज ऑफ कंसर्न, यू कैन से कि एससीसीपी, चलो एससीसीपी ज्यादा से ज्यादा बर वक्त और सरमाया को रेगुलेट कर सकता है. बाकी को तो कर भी नहीं सकता एससीसीपी. व्हाट्स पीटी एंड एसबीपी डूइंग, राइट? एसबीपी को वैसे तो हर चीज में घुसने का बहुत शौक होता है. आई रिमेम्बर 2020 के अंदर उन्होंने चुड़ैल Z5, 2020 के अंदर एक के इंडिया Z5 के ऊपर चुड़ैल्स आया था और ऐसी कैबिनेट डिवीजन ने उन्होंने खत लिखा और एससीसीपी ने कहा जी सरकार, फॉरेन चुड़ैल्स, उन्होंने पेमेंट ब्लॉक कर दी. तो यहाँ पे भी सारा पैसा इजी पैसा और जैस कैश के थ्रू आ रहा है. लिटरली सारा पैसा जो पाकिस्तान में रजिस्टर्ड नहीं है, वो भी अगर जैस कैश इजी पैसा के थ्रू कैसे पेमेंट कर रहा है. I mean, is that, does SBP not know about this? या तो इग्नोर करते हैं. SBP again, they try to shove things under carpet a lot of times. अभी टैग के केस के अंदर भी, if the revelations were, if they were familiar and it was public's money, which was the entire idea of EMI, कि public's money should be protected. And if the custodian of the public's money was indulging in fraudulent activities, isn't it not a state bank's responsibility to inform the public? It failed to do so. Story करने के बाद that information came from profit first. Everyone in the industry knew it for 3 months. एचबीपी को नहीं पता था कि मतलब नन्हे हैं ये, या मतलब अगेन decide which side are you on, right? It's very clear that FCP and SBP are on the side of the industry, and there's no problem with that. But it should not come at the expense of the consumer.
Regulators are
which
always supposed to be on the side of the consumer. I mean, that's the logic behind a regulator, that you regulate the businesses that deal with customers and all that, right? So same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Same thing with the
it's
banks,
in the
right?
name.
Like bank जो है, हबीब बैंक की जो ऐप है, वो हर महीने में like पहले हफ्ते में महीने के वो बंद ही होती है हमेशा. तो even the gimmicky, they came out with this gimmicky thing, get your balance on WhatsApp and all that crap. Even that doesn't work. Someone has to look into these things and be like, you cannot keep doing this every single month and say like, oh, we are working on things. Like, you clearly are not working on things, so you should be fined. The moment your app goes down, you should start, have a fine by the minute. The longer your app is out, the more fines you pay. And I think they'll fix it. If they are faced with such things, they'll fix it in a couple of months. So this is a technical issue. It's not an issue of they don't have enough money and all those things. This is just a technical issue.
They spend 10.5 billion. They spent 10.5 billion rupees in 2021 on IT. Of that, 3.4, 3.5 billion actually went to software.
And I can guarantee you, software भी उन्होंने illegal use किया
होगा. नहीं, आई थिंक बैंक जो है वैसे करने को खर्चे तो ऐसे कर लेते हैं जैसे मतलब उसको यूटिलाइज करे नहीं करे, पेमेंट दे देते हैं. मतलब भले रुला के दें, बट पेमेंट चली जाती है. दे जस्ट डोंट यूज इट बिकॉज ऑब्वियसली इतने ढीले. मतलब अगेन एसबीबी फाइन भी लगा देते. आई ऑनेस्टली डोंट थिंक फाइन से कुछ फर्क पड़ेगा, बिकॉज फॉर देम द कॉस्ट ऑफ that cost of effort will be higher than the cost of file. मुझे ऐसा लगता है. तो it's a case, I mean, I don't know, जंग लग चुका है इसको. और एसबीपी फिर बेस्ट पार्ट है इसके डिजिटल बैंकिंग के अंदर भी अगर एक दो बैंक्स लाइसेंस ले जाएंगे डिजिटल बैंक का, that would be the funniest part.
Basically, what do you think? Like, I know we discussed a little bit of like the failure, we discussed fraud, we discussed funding, we discussed layoffs. And so now, like, how do you feel about the ecosystem in the next few months? Ke bhai, kya hoga? What do you feel? Do you think more startups will fail, layoffs will continue, or will things stabilize, or jo hona tha ho gaya?
I think मजीद बेहतरी की as such कोई उम्मीद नहीं है, but like I don't think I mean, for some reason I did not pin a lot of my hopes on these new players that came in, who were raising like outsized rounds and whatnot. I think मेरी किसी न किसी लेवल पे उम्मीदें कुछ एक select group of founders से ही थी personally, and I think बीच में कुछ बैड एक्टर्स भी आए एज द फ्रॉड एलिगेशंस शो, राइट? आई थिंक वो जब साइकिल के बाद मार्केट थोड़ी छांटी होगी, वो फिल्टर आउट होंगे एंड देन होपफुली अंटिल द नेक्स्ट फ्रेंजी, तो इस तरह के एक्टर्स गायब रहेंगे एंड मे बी इन द नेक्स्ट फ्रेंजी वापस आ जाएंगे. ऑब्वियसली ये नहीं आएंगे, कोई और आएगा, देयर विल बी सम टेकिंग देयर प्लेस. बट आई थिंक इन दैट सेंस चीजें चलती रहेंगी. अगेन हम कोई बहुत बड़े लेवल पे ऑपरेट ही नहीं कर रहे थे टू हैव अ मीनिंगफुल इम्पैक्ट. आई थिंक मेरा ये होता है कि we have that benefit in a sense. I mean, it's not a benefit as such, but फिर भी इम्पैक्ट कितना बड़ा आ जाएगा अगर आप 350 मिलियन मोर और लेस पे देख रहे हैं. फंडिंग वाइज आप 350 पे चले जाएंगे. नॉट दैट के उस 350 से भी बहुत बड़ा स्केल तो उस वक्त भी नहीं दिख रहा था हमें, राइट? इवन व्हेन देयर वाज फंडिंग ऑन ग्राउंड कोई बहुत बड़ा स्केल नहीं दिख रहा था. बाइकिया फॉर एग्जांपल हैज बीन स्ट्रगलिंग एट अ सर्टेन स्केल फॉर क्वाइट सम टाइम. Kareem has been static at its post-COVID scale for literally months, a year even. Uh, then you have, I think, just दो इंडस्ट्रीज के अंदर जो ग्रोथ हुई है, एक तो ये नैनो लोन्स में हुई है, अगेन नॉट समथिंग दैट्स डिजायरेबल एट ऑल, और खाता बुक्स के अंदर हुई है. फॉर देम इट्स टाइम टू फिगर आउट दैट मॉडल. तो जहां जहां ग्रोथ वाला इशू तो शुरू से ही आ रहा था. ई कॉमर्स हैजंट बीन ग्रोइंग दैट वेल. That has been a cause of concern since like 2019 के अंदर literally दराज more or less जिस लेवल पे था, I think उससे कोई बहुत ऊपर नीचे नहीं गया दराज. Even in 2020 they had 2021 early I met BR. I mean I had an interview with BRK and he did point out that Pakistan sort of declined a bit. Uh, तो वहाँ पे भी स्ट्रगल्स हैं. मे बी दे देयर स्ट्रीमिंग बेट पेड ऑफ. आई एम नॉट श्योर अबाउट दैट. हो सकता है कर गई हो. दे गॉट आईबॉल्स एटलीस्ट. अगर उनका गोल आईबॉल्स था तो उन्होंने दे डिड वेल. तो ई कॉमर्स के भी अपने मसले हैं जो कि शुरू से थे, जो रहेंगे. अगेन वो कंज्यूमर, किसी भी कंज्यूमर ड्रिवन चीज़ में रहने वाले हैं. लोगों की कुव्वत खरीद पे जब असर आएगा तो फिर ऑब्वियसली ई कॉमर्स भी, मैं साइकिल से कोई नहीं बच सकता. लोग पिछले 3 साल से, 2.5-3 साल से लोग ये ऐसा एक सेंटिमेंट देते आ रहे थे कि टेक इज काउंटर सिक्लिकल. इट इज नॉट. इट नेवर विल बी. टेक इज वेरी सिक्लिकल. Especially VC funded space is extremely cyclical. So it will outpace in a boom and it will
Yeah, so I
exceedingly
mean,
lag in a
jahan tak
bust.
I feel like there's one thing that I haven't seen, that, or maybe if you have seen it, but not in that scale. There should be acquisitions. Like this is the great time. This is a great time for bigger players to acquire smaller players, even in adjacent markets. Like it doesn't have to be completely vertical. It could be like, a little bit horizontal and like a different market. So I hope that happens. Expectation is that it will happen. And so yeah, so that's something that I think would happen. But then again, we never know.
I think Mira, like this was my perception. Not, I mean, I don't know. ये मेरी अपनी thesis थी. Not even perception. मेरा अपना एक बना हुआ था. I think one of the reasons 2021 के अंदर ही I think शुरू हो जाना चाहिए थे मेरे हिसाब से तो M&A. But I think उस वक्त क्योंकि पैसा इतना आ रहा था, a lot of people thought that they didn't need, they could raise more money independently than they could have gotten access to with by merging with someone. I think मेरा अपना वो था. But obviously now that market has changed, it will be a necessity for sure. In order to survive, there's a lot of room for consolidation in B2B, Kiryana, even B2B agri, खाता स्पेस. मतलब अगर किसी स्पेस के अंदर 5 लोग ऑपरेट कर रहे हैं तो उस पर बहुत जगह है. फिनटेक ई एम आई के अंदर तो कंसोलिडेशन ही कंसोलिडेशन है. आई थिंक 3-4 बैंक्स भी मिल जाए तो कोई कोई बुराई नहीं होगी, कि नॉट दैट कि लैक ऑफ कंपटीशन से कोई फर्क पड़ रहा है सर्विस डिलीवरी के ऊपर. तो इट डजंट मैटर कि
सेफ पे का क्या हाल है? I mean, I know they asked for some approvals, right?
हाँ, the Safepay has been, again, that has been one of the problems, right? So I'm actually some level I prefer regulation, right? खास तौर पर फाइनेंशियल सर्विसेज के अंदर I strongly believe कि regulated होनी चाहिए इंडस्ट्री. अगर आप पब्लिक का पैसा मूव कर रहे हैं या होल्ड कर रहे हैं, then you should be held to higher standard than anyone else. I think it's a very simple belief. Safepay, when it started out without getting any of that, and SBP was right in the sense that SBP लेकर आई. But the problem with PSO PSP or EMI regulations, Safepay is under PSO PSP, कि timelines इतनी ज्यादा लंबी होती हैं, then it stops making sense to actually run the startup मेरे हिसाब से. Safepay team is still at it, but अगर आपको 30 महीने का या 20 महीने का पेरोल देना है without earning a single dollar revenue, I mean, you're going to burn even after operations, you're going to burn for the next 3-4 years at least. तो अगर आप उसमें 20 महीने 30 महीने ऐड कर दें, then you're needlessly burning the startup. And PSO PSP के अंदर चलो I can still see some reason कि you sort of make it independent of the bank, ठीक है, लेकिन टाइमलाइन को कुछ पे फर्क आना चाहिए. एसबीपी रेगुलेशंस तो बहुत लेकर आता है, मगर वो एक्चुअल उस रेगुलेशन का फॉलो थ्रू का रेट क्या होता है. बिकॉज पीएसओ पीएसपी के अंदर लिटरली अभी 2 ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस लाइव हैं. वन ऑफ देम इज वन लिंक, जो एक्चुअली लाइव है. वैसे कहने को 4 लाइव हैं, ऑपरेट जो सही से कर रही हैं. वीआरजी भी उसमें एक है. वीआरजी के ऑपरेशंस का है, मैंने आज तक नहीं देखे. तो जो एक्चुअली 2 काम कर रही हैं, वन ऑफ देम इज वन लिंक, द अदर इज निफ्ट. दोनों पीएसओ पीएसपी से मतलब सदी पहले की आई हुई थी. निफ्ट आई थिंक 1995 में बनी थी, वन लिंक भी आसपास 2001 में बनी होगी इफ आई एम नॉट रॉन्ग. तो उसका वो एक्स पोस्ट रेगुलेट हुई है. वो पहले से कभी पीएसओ पीएसपी नहीं थी. तो वो अगर लाइव ऑपरेशनल है तो उनकी तो दैट्स नॉट एन अचीवमेंट, दैट उनके नंबर्स रिफ्लेक्ट ही नहीं करते पीएसओ पीएसपी को. बट फॉरी हैज बीन स्ट्रगलिंग. चलो उनकी टीम का भी मसला हुआ, फाउंडर्स हैव लेफ्ट. देन यू हैव सेफपे व्हिच इज आल्सो स्ट्रगलिंग. बहुत सारों ने अबेंडन कर दिया आइडिया. यूरोनेट ऑन इनिशियली वाज वन ऑफ द प्लेयर्स. टीपीएल वाज इन द रेस. टीपीएल रुपया के नाम से, इफ आई एम नॉट रॉन्ग, दे अबेंडन द आइडिया. 4 साल से कोई मूवमेंट, 5 साल से उनकी लाइसेंसिंग में कुछ फर्क नहीं आया. ईएमआई के अंदर एक और हुई. तो ईएमआई की दिस इज माय प्राइमरी इशू विद द ईएमआई रेगुलेशन एज वेल. 2018 के अंदर फिंजा और कीनू जो थे वॉलेट्स दे रहे थे. फिंजा हैड अ पार्टनरशिप विद फिनका इन सिमसिम. फिंजा और फिनका ने मिलकर सिमसिम वॉलेट बनाया. आई थिंक 60% फिनका का था, 40% फिंजा का था, या द अदर वे राउंड. Finca obviously had the banking license, microfinance it was, but banking license nonetheless. और जो भी पीछे पेमेंट्स होती थी, बैंकिंग वो हैंडल कर रहे थे. टेक और वॉलेट के पीछे फ्रंट एंड फिंजा कर रहा था. ठीक है. कीनू वेंट द अदर वे. कीनू ने क्या किया, बैंक अल हबीब से पार्टनरशिप की. उनका सेटलमेंट बैंक अल हबीब था. पीछे का जो अकाउंट इश्यू होता था वो बैंक अल हबीब का होता था. वॉलेट बनता था इस इनका. और they had, because they were already part of the POS acquiring ecosystem, they acquired merchants quickly. अब वो merchants यूज करते नहीं करते थे वो एक अलग बहस है, बट ऑन पेपर they had the merchants. 50,000 merchants कर लिए, इस तरह के numbers थे. And they could have been very real numbers as well, क्योंकि they already had a very big merchant ecosystem through POS. Like not very big, but like big enough nonetheless. So फिर क्या हुआ, एसबीपी आया कि यार आप तो रेगुलेटेड नहीं, आप लोगों का पैसा हैंडल कर रहे हैं. पैसा एंड में बैंक हैंडल कर रहा था, वॉलेट नहीं कर रहा था. कीनू वाज द केस इन पॉइंट, बिकॉज बैंक अल हबीब डिडंट हैव इक्विटी इन कीनू फ्रॉम एज फार एज आई नो. सिमसिम के अंदर तो फिनका की इक्विटी थी, तो इट वाज स्टिल अ बैंकिंग कंपनी डूइंग द थिंग्स, राइट. बैंक अल कीनू के अंदर ऐसा नहीं था. So they had come up with a structure to avoid that regulation while still following all the protocols, because they had a bank doing all of that banking operations for them. बट एसबीपी लेकर आया रेगुलेशन में उन्होंने मैंडेट लिमिट कर दिया, बहुत ही मतलब नियो बैंक बेसिकली बना दिया, जो कि मोबाइल पेमेंट्स, बिल पेमेंट्स और ट्रांसफर्स हैंडल कर सकता है, विच वाज एग्जैक्टली द काइंड ऑफ थिंग जो कि actually one less use case than that was available at कीनू. अदरवाइज कीनू पे आप जाके क्यूआर भी कर सकते थे, तो एक मर्चेंट पेमेंट्स का ऑप्शन भी था. तो आपने उसका स्कोप लिमिट किया. आपने द ओनली अलाउंस दैट दे हैड वाज के जब आप ट्रांसफर करने जाते हैं तो वहां पे कीनू का नाम आएगा इंस्टेड ऑफ वो. आई थिंक उसका भी मुझे याद भी नहीं, हो सकता उसके अंदर भी कुछ वो होगा, वे अराउंड होगा. आई डोंट इवन रिमेंबर. 2018 में यूज किया था मैंने कीनू. तो 2018 में ही था, बट 19 के अंदर ईएमआई आ गई थी, तो दे हैड टू गो सॉर्ट ऑफ डाउन अंडर, दे कुडंट मार्केट एटलीस्ट. तो आज आज ईएमआई क्या कर सकता है? दे कैन डू वन लेस फंक्शन. दे स्टिल नीड टू हैव अ सेटलमेंट बैंक एट द बैक. द ओनली डिफरेंस इज कि जो आईबैन नंबर होगा वो बैंक उसका होगा, वॉलेट का अपना होगा. तो फर्क कोई नहीं पड़ा, पैसा अभी भी बैंक के पास ही रखा हुआ है. बस वो 3 साल का लैग इंडस्ट्री में आया, जिससे किसी का कोई फायदा नहीं हुआ. जो एक्चुअल प्लेयर्स थे उनका तो बहुत ही नुकसान हुआ. जो नए प्लेयर्स आए, दे हैव आल्सो बर्न्ड अ लॉट ऑफ कैश, बट स्टिल श्योर इट्स मनी कमिंग इन फॉर्म्स ऑफ इन्वेस्टमेंट. बट एक्चुअल ट्रांजेक्शन नहीं हो रही, देन इट्स यूजलेस. तो दिस इज अ प्रॉब्लम विद द ओवरऑल रेगुलेटेड स्पेस की. टाइमलाइन इतनी स्लो होती है और नीडलेस रेगुलेशन आ जाती है. प्रोटेक्टिंग इन्वेस्टर, प्रोटेक्टिंग पब्लिक फंड इज द राइट गोल. आई हैव एब्सोल्युटली नो क्वेश्चन कि वहां पे रेगुलेट होना चाहिए, इसमें कोई शक नहीं. बट देन
Yeah.
डोंट मेक द
Yeah,
रेगुलेशन
no,
entirely
that's good.
pointless.
That's good insights because I think I've heard of Fori, but the other players like I had no idea like the background के 3 साल का lag और ये सब कुछ. But that's like yeah, regulation is that's how it works unfortunately, and can't do much about it. Well, thank you so much for taking out the time and discussing the ecosystem. As usual, your insights are really really valuable, and I love talking to you, and I can be myself with you.
Thank you for
Yeah.
having me. It's always fun talking to you, honestly.
Thanks for listening to the Misaal podcast. I hope you enjoyed the podcast and will thank me by writing a review or sharing it on social media. Make sure you follow and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Thanks again. See you soon.